Recording going right now.
One.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me out there. Good old people on the internets. Can you tell it's been a while since I've done this? Yeah, so hi. My name's Chris. You probably know that. Maybe or you maybe don't. Welcome back to the Midgar Minute. I'm Chris. And this is our Final Fantasy VII podcast. Normally, I'm joined by my lovely and faithful co-host Nick, but due to certain things outside of our control, Nick is going to be unavailable for a little while. Hence, why we've it's been a while since we've done one of these. But Nick he's okay. Everything's good. He's got some life stuff happening right now. But in lieu of that, I have my good old friend, friend of the show / producer Trey. Trey, why don't you say hello to the wonderful people?
I think this is the first time I've talked on the show itself,
Yeah,
at
yeah,
least on purpose. I've probably cut in a few times as we were doing our technical difficulties.
yeah,
But
yeah. So
um, yeah, I'm happy to tag in. Excited to talk a little Final Fantasy VII and ready because we also had a few delays ourselves. So we both, I
yes, it's
think,
been it's
are
been
ready
kind of
to
a
talk.
nightmare. That's all. It's kind of been a nightmare the last couple weeks. But we're here now, and I'm excited to be back. I'm happy to be back into it here. But before we get too far into it, I do want to, of course, give a very very special thanks to our wonderful folks over at the Mosey Gang who have been so lovely and so patient and just amazing folks. And I want to give special shouts out to them, obviously. And those wonderful people being Scott, Kyle, AJ, Danny, Kevin, Jillian, Brienne, oh God, Matt, Sam, Charlotte, Cameron, Garrett, Dan M, Ryan, Petros, Matt M, Kyle's 48, Colton, Tone, Kimmy, Chris G, John, Flynn, Jesus, Jim, Joey, Trey. Hey, special shouts out to Trey, and also special shouts out to Carmen, the wonderful lad who does our intro and outro music. Gracie, Benjamin, Lucas, Justin, Alex, Chris, Ellie, and Andrew. Thank you guys so much for being so patient with us. I know it's been and also during the sort of downtime between titles, it's it's been a little, even our in between like remake and rebirth, it was kind of a little shaky there for a while, and we were like, I don't know if this is something we could do every week. um but thank you guys so much for sticking around, and we appreciate you so much. And yeah, if anyone listening, if you're interested in supporting the show, we have links in the description. If you're listening to this live, or if you're listening to this after the fact, there'll be links. There's links. You can find them. They're there. You don't have to, but we're just happy to have you here. But if you want to give us at least $1, either $1 a month or $1 once, you can get access to our Discord where we talk about Final Fantasy and memes, and we have a great little community of folks here. We all share our love for FF7, and it's been pretty good there. So, but like I said, if you're just here, if you're listening, that's more than enough, and glad that you're here.
I can vouch for the Discord, and it's also very cool to hear your name said and to watch it go from being like the last one said to now I'm closer towards the middle. So there are parts to it, but it is nice to see the list grow, and it's more comical each time just listening to it get longer.
Because there will be a point where maybe I don't read it out every episode, but I still think it hasn't gotten to that point yet. I feel like we could go at least like 10 more names on there, I think, before it's like, all right, maybe we'll just maybe we got to pre-record this and then just put it on at the end of the episode. But no, it's been great. There's a lot of fun folks in there. We do a lot of fun stuff. Try to do streams and stuff in there as well. And yeah, it's just fun talking to folks. But with that out of the way, I guess let's get into the reason behind this. And I'm sure if you're looking at the title, you probably already know. But we want to talk about Zack and kind of obviously spoilers, huge, massive, mega spoilers for Rebirth and Remake and everything, I guess. And I ever since I feel like it was Ellie had brought it up one time. She's like, "Oh, I found the podcast and started listening to it and didn't realize that you guys were talking spoilers and got spoiled for some stuff. I think it was either for Remake or for Rebirth." And I was like, "Oh, well, now I'm going to be very consciously aware to say that at the beginning before I say anything else in the episode." But yeah, I mean, I guess at this point people probably know that Zack is around, so we'll leave it at that. But yeah, we kind of just wanted to talk about, I don't know, like what is his deal, what's going on. I know Nick and I had sort of touched on it before in previous episodes, but I kind of wanted to do a bit more of a focused approach to it and kind of just see what we think, because there's a lot of stuff, and because Rebirth is such a massive game and there's just so much stuff that they crammed into it, I feel like now that it's been, it's almost a year. We're almost to a year since Rebirth came out, and it once you kind of let everything marinate, there's certain things that start rising to the top a little bit, and I feel like Zack, even though he's kind of like, him being around at all is like huge and massive, I feel like he does get overshadowed a lot in the discussions about this game. And and it's like I said, I think it's not saying anything negative towards Zack, but more just like, there's just so much other stuff going on that I feel like maybe he gets a little neglected. And it doesn't help that he kind of also doesn't do a lot in Rebirth, like generally speaking, like he has the most direct input, like at the very tail end when you're fighting Sephiroth, and that's kind of it. And then other that, and I feel like because they're also, those scenes that we see him in are so spread apart that you kind of, it's almost like they give you enough game and then you're like, oh yeah, right, what's Zack doing? And then just as you're starting to get into what Zack's doing and what all that stuff could mean, it's like, oh no, now we're gonna go back to Cloud and company. So it's like they're always kind of leaving him on the peripheral, and I think that's kind of by design.
You fight with Zack until the very end. I think the majority of his stuff in the story is running, and it's just story. And then
I think
end, you finally get to fight with him, and you get his abilities. And it's like Cloud, but it's just different enough that I enjoyed that it was different enough, and it didn't feel like I was playing with a Cloud clone, which is what I was worried about.
I was gonna say, I was very worried that if they were going to make him playable at all in the game, that I'm like, oh, is it just gonna be, it's gonna be Cloud, but just a reskin Cloud essentially. But no, they went out of their way to make him feel, and to be honest, with how little, because the only times that you control him and do combat is in the very beginning of the game and at the very end. And I feel like even for the little time that we do get, they did take the time and the effort to make him have him his own move set and his own stuff going on, even though we can't even, like, when you pause the game, when you see him at the end, he doesn't even show up in the menu, which I don't know, maybe, I don't know if that's like a design choice or just like a, hey, most people probably are going to forget to hit the little menu button while they're being wowed by this amazing cutscene of Zack and Cloud fighting Sephiroth, which I certainly was.
Just tired at that point. They were like, you know what, we can skip this step.
Like, yeah, no one's gonna, this is not a door, and people aren't gonna bug us about about that.
I do remember, though, between Remake and Rebirth, that I feel like there was a good chunk of the fan base that was worried about Zack's involvement and how much he was going to be featured. And I think you said he was like underutilized, or I'm not sure exactly what you said, but I think they sprinkled him in just about the perfect amount, because I think with the way Rebirth ended, we're set up to get a good chunk of Zack. I think we're going
for
to be
sure.
playing as Zack a good chunk, and this was almost like okay, here's your little Zack tutorial while you're also playing Rebirth.
And
I think they did a great job of bringing him into the story and into the fold slowly, and now it's like, okay, here's the main event coming up.
Right, and I think, honestly, because in the lead up to Rebirth, obviously, everyone's mind's just going, 1,000 miles an hour, being like, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? Because, like you said, Zack even being alive at all is like, I knew a lot of people at the time that didn't like it, and they were like, what the fuck? Like, the whole reasoning for Zack's character, or the whole, like, he was always just like a narrative device, right? And he was never really meant to be like a full blown character until Crisis Core came out, and then they, delved into his character a bit more, because prior to that, he was just like, oh, he's the soldier guy that Cloud knew and like got the Buster Sword from, and that was kind of it. Like, he didn't really, I don't know, like in OG, he didn't really play much of a role, and was definitely meant to be more of like a, hey, this is the guy that Cloud is like mimicking the personality of, or trying to, at least, and kind of failing. And I love Crisis Core so much. I think it was a crime that Square did not put it out on anything sooner than when they re-released it for Reunion, and the only way that you could have played it up until then was either if you had a PSP, which, totally fine. I think you can find PSPs for relatively cheap these days. I don't know about now, but a couple of years ago they were relatively cheap. And then, you either had to have a physical copy, or, I mean, chances are, if you're buying a PSP in the last like 5-6 years, you're probably putting some putting some ROMs on there. Which, I think is still fine, or you could just emulate it on your computer or whatever. And I don't know. I feel like that game didn't get enough love that it deserved. And I think, maybe for like the combat and other aspects about it, I'm like, okay, it's not like the most deepest Final Fantasy game, not even the deepest like spin-off game, but I think as someone, and I liked Zack like right from the get-go, like right when I first started playing Crisis Core back then, I was like, I like this character. And it was kind of, it's kind of almost the same way I feel about Glenn. Like when Glenn, who, first shows up in the first Soldier stuff in like Ever Crisis, I'm like, I know literally nothing about this guy, or next to nothing, but I already like him, and he kind of gave me that same vibe. And then, of course, playing through Crisis Core and all this stuff that is, since then, has only made me appreciate Zack like way more.
the amount of depth I feel like they added, because fans like you and me, like you've done a podcast of breaking down Final Fantasy VII. You love this story so much that
Mhm.
when you get something like Crisis Core that adds so much depth to the backstory, the origin almost of the Final Fantasy VII story that we grew up with, that's that matters in the grand scheme of things to
Oh
people
yeah.
who really, really love the lore like we do. And you're right, it is a shame that it took so long for those Final Fantasy VII fans who, because it has such a growing fan base. Like people grew up
Mhm.
loving it and sharing that with the next generation. And the next generation wasn't, like you said, they weren't playing the PSP version. Like
No,
I've got a
they were
16-year-old.
like maybe like 5 years
There's no
old when the
chance.
PSP was out. Maybe,
Right.
if that.
So to see that get re-released was great. And to see I was a fan of Zack in remake, so I've been hyped for this from the jump. But I think they executed it perfectly, and I think we're going to just I think the game might be 35% us playing as Zack almost. I think it's
Yeah, and
going to be a ton.
that's another interesting thing too, because that was another, in the lead up to Rebirth coming out, kind of being like, is Zack gonna be playable? Is it just gonna be cutscenes? Is it gonna literally be like a split narrative where it's like, oh, you playing half the game as Cloud and the group, and then you play the other half as Zack? And honestly, I was thinking, yeah, it would be more kind of like that, where it's like, all right, you're gonna explore Gaia and do all these things with and all the normal OG FF7 stuff with Cloud and company, and then all the new shit was gonna be with you're gonna play as Zack, and he has his own party of people, and you have your own adventures in like this alternate Midgar, and like maybe do some other stuff and find out some other things that way, which I mean, essentially is what they did, but they definitely parsed it down a lot. And I think it only really benefits it because, like you said, I feel like this is just the big, this is the step before the finale where everything's going to go down. And like now that we have a better idea of what Sephiroth is intending to do and all these other things, I think them sort of peppering him throughout Rebirth instead of making him like a full on like pillar of it is going to pay off a lot more in the long run, because then it's just going to be they, like you said, they gave us the little tastes, and then we're going to get the full 3-course meal whenever whatever the third game is comes out. But speaking of Sephiroth and like what he plans to do, I had recently watched a video, and I hope I have it still up here somewhere. It was by oh yeah, I do have it. Okay, a guy named Dan the Zam on YouTube had posted a video about a year ago titled "Zack Fair: A Beacon of Hope." And in that video, he kind of goes into kind of like what we're going into here, like what is Zack do, like what's the reasoning, why are they showing these things, what do these scenes mean? And he kind of goes into the fact that Zack has Zack the puppy, right? And kind of he's always been like this very bright-eyed, very he's very hopeful, even when and you're playing through Crisis Core and you're going through his story and he loses everything, and like his world completely gets turned upside down like a couple of times actually. He's still he's still very chipper and very like, oh, come on, man. And he's always very upbeat and very hopeful. And something I didn't even think about that Dan the Zam had brought up with that is that with all this stuff with Sephiroth going on, and he is essentially using the all of the despair, instead of it being a reunion for um just for Genova, it's more of a reunion of like, oh, I'm gonna bring everything together, and I'm gonna take the despair from all of these different realities and all the negative emotions and everything, and I'm just gonna use everything to attack the live stream instead of just doing that. But he is explaining, and something I didn't really pick up on as clearly as when I was playing through it, is that, if you think about where Zack is at in Rebirth, right, and he's like in this, version of Midgar that everything is very bleak, and everyone, like, Elmira says, oh, the world's ending, or everyone thinks the world's ending because they see the tear in the sky, and everyone's kind of, Aerith is in a coma, like this is the dark timeline, quote unquote. But what we see throughout Zack's time in Sector 5 is that he is, like, little by little kind of trying to bring everyone else up around him. And it's something that I didn't, again, totally, when I was playing through, totally missed. That, like, he is slowly but surely, being that thing, he being that last little spark of hope in this world, whichever world he finds himself in. And that's always kind of Zack's, persistence. And and when I heard him talk about that, it kind of clicked for me. I was like, oh, that's what, because when you think about it, what is Sephiroth doing throughout all of Rebirth and Remake? He's trying to fuck up Cloud, right? He's trying to tear Cloud down, like, at his, like, fundamental level, right? And because he thinks, from Sephiroth's perspective, at least from OG, right, who's the guy who brought him down? Cloud. And he's like, okay, well, now that I'm doing all this crazy new shit that I'm doing, I'm gonna go after Cloud, and if I take him down, then there's gonna be nothing in my way to get in the way of whatever I want to do. But I think Sephiroth, he has completely written off Zack as, like, oh, he's just a, hopeful, he's just Zack the puppy, whatever. And I feel like that's going to end up biting him in the ass. Because we even, and Dan the Zam brings up, and is, one of my favorite moments in Rebirth, like when you're about to have the final fight with Sephiroth, and Aerith comes back to help Cloud, and Sephiroth turns around and goes, yeah, I underestimated you. So I think Sephiroth has a massive ego, maybe a massive ego, a little tad of a god complex in there. So he, I think, is ripe to have something like that, something that he just, oh, I didn't even think about this, as being the thing that kind of undoes his whole plan. And, if his plan is to use all the negative emotions and all this stuff, all this strife that's going on in all these different worlds, Zack is kind of there in the background, kind of almost like, taking it down from the inside, sort of thing. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, and it's something like I never once crossed my mind during my Rebirth playthrough. But sorry, Trey, you were gonna say something?
My best to not. I watch a lot of wrestling, and they call it fantasy booking. I do my best to not fantasy book how I want this third game to go. But you talking and bringing that stuff up, I can't help myself. You mentioned that you think Sephiroth wants to tear down Cloud, and he wants to just break him down in a way that he wasn't able to in the main timeline. And I think you've discussed before. That's why Tifa he puts the doubt in Cloud's mind about Tifa with I think Scar, and he wants to doubt that. And now with Aerith being alive / dead, once that news happens and breaks, if he also doubts Tifa, I think that Sephiroth's mind, that's going to just break him even more. But when you brought up Zack and his positivity, my mind instantly went to Aerith, and I was like, oh, I wonder if that's kind of how they bonded, and that's why their relationship kind of grew, because they're both just that positive, that positive energy in the slums, like for Aerith.
Yeah, they kind of synergize a little bit.
Dark, yeah. And in a place as dark as Soldier, Zack being that positive light, I feel like maybe that's what drew them to each other.
Yeah, kind of like a gravitational pull. Yeah.
I think he's going to have Cloud down and out, and he's going to be doubting Tifa, and then Aerith and Zack are going to come riding in together, and the combined powers of their positivity are going to be enough to bring Cloud back from the brink, and that'll be what spoils the big plan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it all ties back into, if we're thinking about Final Fantasy VII and the compilation material, as this is all like chronologically happening, right? And like Remake and Rebirth are sequels to all the stuff that has come before it. It kind of puts like, oh, like at the end of Advent Children, when you see, Aerith and Zack in the light of the doorway of the church, right? And I think Nick and I have talked about before when we were talking about like the live stream white and black stuff, which they are very obviously gearing towards and implementing into this new narrative here. I couldn't think of two characters in this story that would signify that more or better than Aerith and Zack, because they are without a doubt the brightest, cheeriest people, and they're always trying to look for the upside, and they're always trying to bring everyone else up. And I mean, it is it's interesting because it's like when you look at the rest of the cast of FF7, and you're like, well, I mean, there's definitely some of them that are a bit more like chipper and a bit more cheerier, but there's always that underlying sort of sadness, and even with Aerith and Zack, that's there too. But I feel like they don't let it consume them in the way that the other characters do. Like Cloud obviously has a lot going on. He's got a lot of things he's working with. Yeah, and then we have like Tifa, who, she's trying her best to put on a smile and a brave face, but deep down, that she's still struggling with things, and she can still, she kind of, and you see it a lot in Rebirth too. I feel like with Tifa in particular, it's like they did such a good job of portraying that like struggle within her, especially as the story goes on, and she's starting to be like, all right, something is very, very wrong with Cloud. It's like, I feel like for a while she was trying to kind of like brush it off, or be like, oh, well, maybe it's like a soldier thing, or, maybe he just doesn't want to talk about it. But then once you get to Gongaga, and it's like, no, Cloud is just now straight up just misremembering things. And I love that scene in Nibelheim when you go back there, and then Cloud completely just inserts himself into the memory there, and like still doesn't acknowledge it really, but he's like, oh, that's right, Zack, how could I forget about my best friend Zack? And then it's like he's kind of getting there, he's kind of putting the pieces together, but he's not quite there. And with Tifa, you see, she is like struggling because she really cares for Cloud, and she's like, she doesn't want to like push him too much, and like just the little things like that. And then Barrett is another great example of a guy who just, he's very boisterous and loud and kind of out there, but he's harboring all this guilt and the shame that he feels for, essentially, dooming Corel and kind of getting a lot of people killed, and you know what I mean. So it's like, and Vincent, obviously, Sid, obvious, you know what I mean? Like all these other characters, they have it, and they're trying their best to kind of keep moving forward and do what they got to do, but you see it like gets the better of them at some point during their story, right? But with Aerith and Zack, I feel like that has never happened to them. Like they have gone through all this horrible shit, and they've lost people that were close to them, and they still are just like, yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm still gonna try and make, even though I'm going through it, I'm gonna still try and make other people's lives better, putting other people ahead of myself well, I mean, said Zack does it in like the most finite way possible, originally. And you know what, and kind of tying it back to what we were at the beginning of this conversation, we're talking about how a lot of people were upset that Zack was alive at all, because his death is not only one of like the most iconic and just like recognizable scenes from this entire franchise, it kind of does give, his death gives Cloud, eventually. And another thing, again, want to shout out Dan the Zam brought up this good point, is that even though Zack in the OG timeline in Crisis Core, he never actually like was a hero in the general sense. Like he wasn't doing like saving the world, right, from like this big huge calamity. It's like, no, he died trying to save Cloud, but with him sacrificing himself for Cloud, it eventually, because of that sacrifice and through that sacrifice, Cloud would eventually go on to defeat Sephiroth, and kind of, and like, so in a way, like Zack finally does become the hero in that sense. And I feel like now with him being back, I could lie and say that I didn't feel kind of cheated a little bit when I saw him back, but I mean, I was also just very excited. But once the excitement sort of wore off, I did have a little bit of a doubt in my mind, because I'm like, yeah, like, he's such an important, narrative device. Like, how could they possibly still keep things the same? And then it's like, well, now we know that they are kind of keeping them separate, right? We're kind of keeping separate, and I don't think that, even Zack coming, like that whole fight at the end with Cloud and Zack and Sephiroth, that was a prediction that I had for the ending of the third game. So I don't know where they could possibly go in the third game in terms of that, but I think, I mean, unless you have it, you'd be like
we just go right
Cloud, Aerith, and Zack maybe all at once. Which, I mean, they kind of did.
Here's my hot take for the next game, and it's really not going to be a hot take when you think about it. That's how it's going to end, and that will be the only time Cloud and Aerith fight on the same team in the entire next game. It'll be Zack and Aerith together, and then it'll be Cloud and Tifa.
It'll honestly, I feel like it could be very much like how Zack was in Rebirth. Like, we're gonna see Aerith throughout the game, because she's now, existing in Cloud's mind, or whatever that is. But yeah, we're not gonna see her.
I think we get gameplay with Zack and Aerith running around, maybe through multiple timelines, even.
Maybe, yeah, because it seems like to me, because I like, and it kind of ties it all back in with Zack, and we go back to all these other things, and once he kind of realizes, like, oh yeah, okay, so he was kind of questioning, like, why am I here, like what's going on, and you kind of see a little bit more, and even him not knowing why he's here, what's happening, what's Sephiroth up to, like, he's still trying to get shit done. He's still trying to do things, and even at the end of the game, I think, his last lines are like, so I forget the exact line, but about worlds merging, and so do they part, but maybe they can find each other again, which obviously means that we're going to be seeing more of him. And I think now because it's hard for me to say exactly where Zack is. I still think that everything, even like the main story, it's all happening within the live stream. I think the live stream is basically just an all-encompassing thing, and kind of nothing's ever really, no one's ever really dead, and like no one's like, everyone's just kind of existing in this, and even like the multiversal aspect of things, it's like they still all exist within the live stream, right? But it's kind of, instead of it being, like, oh, this is a different world with a different live stream, and this, I think it's everything is interconnected, and all these other realities and things that they're all sort of like spinning off, and like kind of like maybe even infinitely so, like within the live stream at all times. You know what I mean? So like all these worlds and stuff, because it seems like even with Sephiroth has kind of said something similar.
At the end of the game, you mentioned that Zack has the scar, the big wound in the sky, and then at the end of the game, Aerith and Cloud, when they go to that third world, with the
Yeah,
other
where
the other
only
dog.
only they can see, or only Cloud can see the tear in the sky, and none of the other
No,
party members can.
I think they go to a different world, and then they can both Aerith and Cloud are in a world that also has the thing in the sky, and then
Hmm.
when Cloud goes back to the quote unquote main timeline, Cloud's the only one who can see the rip in the sky.
Right. Hmm.
And I think the world that doesn't have the rip for everyone else in the sky, I think that's the quote unquote main timeline that we're all going to have to get back to. That
Right.
eventually leads to like Advent Children and that 7 seconds.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that'll be because it very much seems like with Sephiroth doing all of his, shenanigans that he's been getting up to. Obviously, if, whatever the timeline can, space time continuum, whatever you want to call it, if that, whatever form that would take in this world, obviously is taken some damage from all of his meddling. So I think that's what we're seeing, like these little pocket dimensions. And even like, we see like when Zack's making the choice between going to save Biggs or going to, find a cure for Cloud. And then, he chooses to go with the Cloud. And then and then we still see that other reality where he goes to Biggs. And I feel like it's kind of, that the idea of like the multiversal theory, just in general, right? And the idea that like every second that goes by is another, like, its own separate unit. Like every passing second is its own separate universe, right? And it has the potential to go off into an infinite amount of other things and all that stuff. Very heady, very. I love thinking about that sometimes because it just kind of
I
puts
didn't
things into
even think
perspective.
about I didn't think about the fact that we also saw the Biggs timeline, but I
Hmm.
loved how they had what's the dog's name?
Stamp.
Stamp. They had Stamp. They confirmed the third timeline with the pug
Hmm.
Stamp. And so I think that Biggs, him going off to Biggs, that would have been maybe, a pit bull
Right,
version.
right,
Or
and because
I think
I
that was
love
just
that.
like you said, another version.
Right, yeah, and I love that they that Stamp is our only real way to tell, aside from any like very obvious things like Zack being there, right? But I like how they're using Stamp to denote what world we're in. So you have like the Terrier Stamp, which was like that was the first one we saw when Zack was alive at the end of remake, right? And I think in the Prime line it's a Beagle, and then we see like I think there was a Pomeranian one in the that little when Zack and when Cloud and Aerith go on their like their last date kind of. And then I think uh when right before Aerith gives Cloud her materia and pushes him back into I guess the prime line or whatever. You can tell that that's the same one that they were in because when Zack, it cuts to Zack outside the church, and then you see Johnny walk by, and then he's holding like a Stamp figurine, and I think it's the same one, so you can tell that's that same kind of thing. It's such a weird choice, but I love that they did that, and it was something that like they they did literally put it in front of your face at the end of remake with like to denote like, hey, this isn't the same timeline or whatever. But then they kind of pull back a little bit and let you. I'm someone who likes when stories don't just hand everything out to you in terms of like figuring out the narrative, right? I like things where you have to use your head a little bit, or you know, maybe it doesn't have a definitive meaning or purpose or ending, but you can think about it and go, whatever you think could have happened, just like a general example, like
They give
something like
enough that if
Inception,
you
right?
look, you know.
Right, and it's like a thing of like, oh yeah, you kind of just you can figure it out and kind of, you don't need to be like, hey, we don't need a giant signpost. I mean, initially they did to let you to really like let you know like, hey, this isn't, because I mean, how would Zack surviving even happen, and that's another thing too. I feel like in that lead up to Rebirth, kind of being like, how is this gonna work? Like, how does Zack being alive, is that going to change our current timeline of things? Is like, was Rebirth gonna be a completely different game where, yeah, we might go to the same locations and stuff. And then it kind of ended up being a bit more like remake in that sense, where it's like 90 to 95% of the stuff that we all remember, and with a little bit of the new stuff sprinkled in there. And I still think for the third game that's also going to be the case. I don't see them, because I kept thinking like, oh man, if they're bringing Zack back, like what are they gonna do? Like it's gonna it's gonna be all, they're gonna just go nuts, and it's gonna be fucking Kingdom Hearts. It's gonna be crazy. But at least as far as right now, I still don't. And I believe I'd said, maybe at the very beginning of this podcast, like in general, or maybe like at the end of when remake had come out and we had played it and everything, that there is always that little bit of that little tiniest nugget of like, maybe it'll go off the rails at some point. But after Rebirth came out and I played through that, I'm like, I don't think so. I think everything about these games has been so meticulously crafted that every little tiny detail is going to mean something eventually, or it is like they're, planting the seeds, as it were, through, for the rest, and then we'll have the big payoff in the third game, and then who knows, maybe, I don't know if they're going to, branch out and do spin-offs and things like that, but
with Aerith leaving the group, the third game is set up to basically go, like you said, right in line with pretty well how the main story is going. And we don't need to get into this today, but my big questions are, when does Cloud find out about Aerith, and how does that all happen? Like, does that happen instead of him falling into the Mako thing? And again, we don't need to get into that. But I also will be mad.
Are we gonna get Cloud in a wheelchair? God damn it!
Well, I think we probably will, but is it because he falls into a Mako pool, or is it because his brain gets broken whenever he realizes that Aerith is dead and he doesn't believe Tifa's real, and he just goes catatonic?
But yeah, that is definitely interesting, because to me, I would have initially said like, well, it's kind of like all the work that Cloud did over the course of Remake and Rebirth kind of gets undone a little bit by the end of it, because it's almost like, even in that final fight with Sephiroth, he's like, oh, you can't, that shit's not going to work on me anymore. And you can kind of like, the struggle for Cloud's mind is like kind of a focal point of that a last conflict, right? And the whole, like, when he's, running after Aerith to try and get the black materia, and he's like, doing his crazy laugh and and all that stuff, which I thought was a really great touch. And then you kind of feel like, all right, maybe he's actually like, okay, he's getting better, right? There's improvement happening here. But now that, Aerith is now coming to him like Sephiroth was, and that obviously I don't think Aerith is trying to like traumatize him or whatever, but I mean, now that I'm saying all this, now I'm thinking, what if Aerith is a construct of Sephiroth? What if Sephiroth is pulling the strings even there? And is that's going to be like his final, like, oh yeah, you thought she was around now? Because it very much to me seems he kind of is almost like at the finale of Rebirth, he's kind of acting the way that he was in the beginning of Remake, right? And the kind of the cold, aloof style, he's kind of off to the side. He's not really interacting with any of the other characters.
Here we go fantasy booking again. But do you think maybe Cloud comes to Aerith with doubts about Tifa and the scar and everything?
That's what I'm saying, man, because it seems
Aerith is like, you can't trust anyone, and then turns into Sephiroth right there, and then reveals Aerith is dead as Cloud is breaking down. Like that,
that was that like, as I was talking before, that was just a stray thought that entered my mind. It's like, what if Sephiroth is pulling the longest con ever? And he's gonna be like, oh yeah, no, she was always dead. Like, like you saw me kill her, and
have
all the rest of it was just Cloud's mind breaking and being like, oh yeah, I saved her. But at the same time, you also, I don't know, because of how everything was. And I've watched the finale of Rebirth. I couldn't even put a number on it at this point. Just trying to just not only just to like experience it, but or sorry, well, not just to like just watch it and like research it, but just to kind of experience it, because the whole finale, by the way, super well done, and is like one of the most, like, even I still, whenever I watch it, and
and
there's
that's
that
I'm
moment
not
where
worried about
when
what they're going to do.
right when
They
Sephiroth
nailed Rebirth.
doing, yeah, exactly. And Sephiroth is, he's doing the down, he's doing his down B, right? um or his down A, I guess. And there's that moment where Cloud's like, no, and then he raises up his sword to deflect Sephiroth. I think that's still, even though I know what happens, sort of, kind of, that's still like, I get even now I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that whole sequence, because I another thing that them doing like the QTE, which has been another really fun thing, like watching other people play Rebirth, and how many people think that when the button prompts show up when Cloud's holding up his sword, that is the button prompts to kill Aerith or to like swing for her, when in actuality it's, if you're hitting, was it like L2 and R2, he's resisting the sword going up, and like he knows that it's happening and he's trying to
I
fight
think
it.
there's even tension on the triggers.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that they maybe I want to say that there was a developer interview that had came out, and that they said that they wanted it to be sort of ambiguous, right? And kind of have it be like, oh yeah, maybe we would give you the quick time event to like swing your sword at Aerith. Maybe we, you know what I mean? And like, I just thought that was very interesting, because to me, like when I was playing it through the first time, that was very much like, oh, I'm doing this